I'm Isabelle Gonthier, Chief Assessment Officer at PSI Services, and I invite you to delve deep into the world of testing with me. Every episode, I'll be on the virtual couch with experts from the testing industry, engaging in conversations about the latest developments in our field. Your quest for testing knowledge starts here. Well, so welcome to this episode of the Tried and Tested podcast. I am extremely excited to be here in London with two guests. So today we're going to be talking about the state of assessment in the UK market, being in the UK. So thinking about challenges and opportunities around innovation. So I'm joined by Matt Wingfield. He's the Managing Director of EdTech Horizons. Welcome, Matt.
Hi.
And then Tim Burnett, he's the founder, Education Tech Consulting, and the founder of the Test Community Network. And you're proudly wearing a T-shirt today.
Oh, yes, I'm all branded up today. Thank you.
This is great. So I love this. So as I was mentioning, we are in London today because there is the e-assessment conference starting. So we'll be able to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about what it means for our community and so on and so forth. But as we get started, always interested in hearing your stories. So if you can each share a little bit about your background, how did you get involved in the assessment industry, really talking about your journey, because we learn a lot from that. So Matt, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. And again, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to be part of the podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my journey really started when I became a teacher. Elementary / primary school teacher, and really got into the technology, was asked to take over IT strategy for the school that I was working in at the time. And through that, and a slightly circuitous route, became involved in the EdTech industry. So this is going back some 30 years. And was involved in that, for a long time. I've seen a lot of evolution of technology use in assessment through that period. In 2008, became part of the e-Assessment Association, so I was one of the founders of the association, and then became chair in 2012. A post I held for about 9 years, and I've been involved in all of the EAA stuff. Through that period, the awards that we're giving away tomorrow night, that was an idea that I had over a cup of coffee with one of the colleagues, born through frustration that there wasn't really a great way to show off the great stuff that was going on in the assessment space. It was all about using EdTech for learning and not so much on the assessment side of things. So always been very passionate about using technology in assessment, but only where it makes things better, not just necessarily making things more efficient. I'm a bit of a believer in trying to improve assessment through technology rather than just trying to make it easier, if you like. And really looking forward to the conference this year. Some great stuff coming up, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great. It's great to hear your journey, and then the fact that you were part of the creation of the association and the evolution of it, which is great because, looking at what it's designed to do, like the highlight it provides to assessment, like you mentioned the awards, I think it's great because, yes, we need more opportunities to showcase what organizations are doing and really highlight the great work, innovation, and dedication that we see in our industry. So Thanks for that.
No problem.
Yeah. What about you, Tim? What's your story?
So I remember sitting down when I was 12 with the careers council advisor, and he said, "What do you want to be?" I said, "I want to be a consultant working in the assessment space." It was amazing, really. I think everyone takes a slightly different path. My journey was at university. I did industrial design, kind of design technology, and as part of that process, I did my teaching qualification. So again, like Matt, teacher in the space. But when I graduated in 2000, which was kind of the big kind of internet boom kind of period, I decided to go into web design and development. And I kept my educational roots within the museum space and carried on working there. Then 6 years later, I made the switch to a company called BTL, some people might be familiar with, where I worked in various different roles, products, projects and marketing, etc. And then in 2021, I think it was, I decided to become a consultant, kind of switch out. I thought I'll try my hand at providing services to various different organizations within the space. And again, it's been another kind of evolution. I almost compare my career like Madonna, kind of reinventing myself every wave that comes along. So now I'm in a position where I'm providing consultancy advice on the AI route for organizations, awarding organizations, as well as kind of technology providers. So, different aspects of how they implement it and what they think about it, but, all in that kind of assessment space. And I've always been a kind of huge, whenever someone said, would you like to join a committee? I've always stupidly volunteered for that and said, yep. So that found me into the Assessment Association. I took over as chair from Matt. I was more of a kind of interim chair, I think, between Matt and Graham, I think. But then I've also done a lot of work with the Association of Test Publishers. I have the It Depends podcast. I'm a part-time teacher, and now I'm the kind of founder of the Test Community Network, somewhere I'm trying to kind of build a space for, I suppose, a marketplace. And your podcast is part of that. It's on one of the many podcast channels that are out there. So just trying to connect the industry through content, really.
Yeah, which I think is great because again, we have an amazing industry, lots of connections, but there's a lot, so it's hard to know and have access or visibility to everything. And I think what you're doing with the Test Community Network helps in terms of like providing highlights around all of those wonderful across various sectors. We talk about you're both from more of the education side of the space. There's different elements to it. There's the credentialing. There's language assessments. There are so many different types of assessments, and being able to have that visibility and that place to go is really, really, really good. So appreciate your work on this. This is great.
I think just coming in there, it's a very interesting point, because I think although it's very easy as technologists, as people who feel comfortable with the use of technology, to imagine that that's true of everybody. And of course it isn't. And actually one of the biggest challenges is finding avenues, or I can't think of quite the right word, forums, where people can come together and share their thoughts and ideas and build their confidence in using technology.
Yeah.
So Tim's Test Community Network is a great place for that. The E-Assessment Association is a similar, and then I chair a subgroup of the EAA called the Assessment Organisation Network, which is all about getting organisations who are delivering assessment to come together and talk to each other about their experiences of e-assessment in a non-threatening way, in a way that they can just feel comfortable talking and sharing about their practices. And I think that's the key to success. It's helping each other to understand what's possible and what the challenges are and how to overcome those.
I agree. That collaboration is so important because people, organizations, people can learn from each other's and learn from the challenges, identify the opportunities. And I think that's where, with the e-assessment associations and what's happening this week provides another opportunity for that. And so this afternoon, we're going to be going to the AI symposium. So it's taking place today. You've mentioned your role with the EAA. So what are some of the key trends that you're expecting to emerge from the event, the discussions, and the interactions we're going to have today? So Matt, what about you?
Well, so I think it is the conference is always a really great place to hear about new projects, hear about new implementations. Again, going back to the point we were just mentioning, giving people confidence in their own projects and efforts to widen the use of technology. So I think there's going to be lots of that. There always is every year. It's a great place to understand that. And then rather biasedly plugging the awards on Tuesday evening, where we celebrate some of the best projects that are going on in the world in e-assessment. And it is truly global. I mean, we've got 18 countries represented in the finalists.
18 countries?
18
wow.
countries. And, that's amazing. That there's all this great stuff going on. And yet there will still be people coming to the conference or listening to this podcast who are still feeling a bit unsure about how they use it. So it's about sharing that. And the conference and the awards do a great job of that. I think we're going to hear more about people using the assessment technologies in broader ways, increasingly embracing AI. I think there was a lot of reticence about AI in the early days. Rightly so, because I think we have to be critically nervous of new technologies when they come along, because, again, a great believer personally of not just jumping on the technology bandwagon for jumping on the technology bandwagon's sake. There's got to be a purpose to it. It's got to help improve things. And then actually just this morning, because there's a couple of roundtables taking place this morning, and I've been at the workforce development roundtable this morning, talking to Ofqual. They're doing a session on Wednesday afternoon where they're going to be talking about the use of AI in awarding, in marking, their thoughts on how that, because they've been quite nervous about it, and their official guidance is that awarding organisations shouldn't be using AI for marking yet, and it will be interesting to see in that session, and talking to Jo, who's going to be delivering the session this morning. She wants it to be interactive, so she wants to understand what people want of Ofqual's position, and I think we're also going to hear a little bit more about how that position is changing. So really exciting.
Which is interesting because in a way, so understanding the role of an organization like Ofqual, which is kind of like about accreditation, so they have a responsibility to the standards to provide like that kind of like system and infrastructure to provide guardrails. The flip side of it, though, is that we also need to kind of sometimes push the limits to continue to evolve. So it's a balancing act. It's a hard one. It's definitely a hard one, but it's great. I'm definitely looking forward for that conversation. And the important thing is that, yes, let's engage in the conversation and not just hide behind, well, we should do this, we shouldn't do this. This is why things are moving so fast. We have to be open to how it evolves. And I guess, Tim, that kind of like probably it's a good segue to you in terms of what you're seeing and expecting for what we're going to expect to see at the conference.
So obviously, so the AI symposium is obviously focused on AI, but then throughout the rest of the conference, there are a great deal of sessions and presentations by vendors and also by people, organizations using the technology for their assessment programs. I think we're at a stage now we're hearing more and more kind of almost use kind of case studies, people's kind of experiences with the AI side of things. I don't think it's been around for a long time, but I don't think we've kind of seen anything huge and massive in kind of any kind of big initiatives that have been done. It's still very much a kind of people trying it in small locations, which is good. We are quite a conservative, and that's with small c kind of industry, aren't we, in terms of our progress? And rightfully so. It's high stakes. People's lives are a future. There are a lot of sessions that are talking about item creation and marking, which are great and important conversations. My concern there is that, that's 21st century technology solving a 20th century problem, and I think we do need to, as an industry, figure out exactly what the future of assessment is going to look like. And I would like to see more conversations about the kind of future assessments down the line, because work and how we interact, and we maybe touch on this later, but everything is evolving so fast, and the world that we'll be living in 5 years' time will be very different. Jobs that we have now might not even exist. So there is some good stuff where they talk about VR, which obviously VR kind of cropped its head up a few years ago and kind of then disappeared. But now, it's augmented with AI. It makes it even more exciting, even what the possibilities. And I think, wearables and, XR, AR, I'm really excited by kind of Google's kind of new kind of initiatives around, remember the Google Glass, kind of a little bit of a failure, way ahead of its time kind of project. But, there's new opportunities for those kind of technologies. Well, I think one thing, there is a bit of a gap in terms of the literacy that people still have. People are still very nervous. Some people, they don't even know what Notebook LM is or something like that. Some of the great products that are out there that are able to support people. I think we've been very focused on the assessment, but there is a huge opportunity wider for organizations to embrace AI for business operations and the business of assessment. And it would be nice to have a few more conversations about that, but there are some. I think one that I'm really excited. So Rita Bateson's doing the keynote for the AI symposium today, and I was fortunate to have a conversation with her a few weeks ago about the environmental impacts of AI. And I think what we need to be careful of, the digital assessment community has always said, we are the greener option when it comes to how assessment is delivered. Paper, very wasteful, all those kind of things. I think we need to be we need to keep our heads in check on that one, because AI uses, super amounts of electricity and energy, big, and if we're not careful, then we're going to wander into a territory that we're kind of ignoring, and it's that kind of inconvenient truth. So Rita is going to kind of peel back the layers a little bit on that. So I think this is what's great about the conference is there's lots of breadth, lots of engaging organisations that come along, and it probably is the only event really. Yeah, ATP Innovations Conference, things like that. They're not about technology; they're about assessment, aren't they? Whereas this is about technology and assessment. It's a very focused event, and it's worthwhile people.
It's that important combination that is critical as we continue to think about the innovation, think about how we can leverage that interconnections between the two. I really like also what you're saying around, it's all about. Yes, we're having discussions about the existing approach and formats, but we need to sort of expand that conversation 100%. That's is where it's going to get us to the future. That being said, back to the comment earlier around as we think about regulatory framework, as we think about, Ofqual, like the EU AI Act, and all of these things that are kind of establishing a little bit more of that framework and guardrail. How do we navigate that? I guess would be my question, because it's reshaping how we do things while at the same time sort of like, I don't want to say constraining, but I will constraining ourselves a little bit. So I'm interested to hear your perspective on that, because it's that balancing act again.
It is. It absolutely is. And I think it's an evolving picture. I think we have to bear in mind that high stakes assessment particularly has always been a very risk averse sector. I mean, nobody likes change, but our sector is particularly adverse to change and worried about the implications of it, because there's always this, rightly so, there's this focus around making sure that assessment is valid and rigorous and achieving the outcomes that you need. And as soon as you start to throw some curveballs in there around new technologies that might make that quicker or easier or whatever, then people rightly get a bit nervous. And so they look to the regulators. And unfortunately, in the UK, and I don't think this is unique, but we have a regulator who is also very risk averse, because they're the ones who are guarding the standard of the assessment delivery, and rightly so, making sure it's good. But if they come out with edicts, as they have in the last couple of years, that says, thou shalt not use AI to do this or to do that, then that makes the sector even more jittery.
Yeah.
But interestingly, and I don't know whether you'd concur with this, Tim, but interestingly, I think that people are starting to play around the edges of that increasingly, and that awarding organisations, professional bodies are seeing the benefits that AI can bring, certainly in terms of efficiencies and speeding things up. Not quite yet at the point, and I completely agree, that Tim made earlier on about improving assessment and looking to what assessment might look like in 5 years' time. They're not there yet, I don't think. But they are playing around the edges. And I think that's good, because if they wait for Ofqual to come up with a stance that says, OK, now we're comfortable with AI and we think it can do it, then they're going to be waiting quite a long time, because I think, it'd be interesting, as I said earlier, to see what Ofqual's going to say at the conference. But I suspect they're broadly still nervous about it. So we ought to be innovating around the edges. So I think we're seeing some of that, which is good. I do think, talking about the EU AI Act, and I'm no great expert on this, but I think that's broadly a good thing, because I think it's giving people confidence in that there being something out there to provide those guardrails that you're talking about. So Ofqual's position is, don't use it. The Act's position is, well, if you're going to use it, then here are some guidelines of how to use it safely. And I think that's really constructive and important. I do think, though, and maybe this is just my perspective, which might be wrong, I'm not sure how widespread the awareness of the Act is within awarding bodies and professional bodies yet. And I wonder whether that's something that we ought to work together as a community to make people aware of, so that they can understand that there's stuff out there that can or will come in to support the use of AI safely. So yeah, I think this is all broadly seen as a good thing, but the regulators are still a bit behind the curve. And so it's good to see awarding bodies and professional bodies starting to play around the edges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Tim, sort of like going into on from that perspective, but thinking about some of the challenges, yes, opportunities, but challenges awarding bodies are facing around, as it relates to regulation, but also as it relates to what they're trying to accomplish and achieve using the new technology. Where do you think it's going to go and how to navigate those challenges?
I think one fundamental thing that people, I suppose, need to understand when it comes to generative AI. So we're talking about generative AI, the kind of the post November 2022 ChatGPT sort of things. Is a lot of the industries or the people who create it, Anthropic, OpenAI, they don't really truly actually understand how it works. They're still researching how those models actually kind of make their decisions, and I think this is something that people need to be aware of if they're thinking about soul marking, which Ofqual, which for people who don't know, Ofqual regulates England. Scotland has its own regulator, Ireland, CCEA, and Qualification Wales for Wales. And I think we have a slightly different kind of structure and setup here in the UK. GDPR is probably still more of a kind of pressing thought for a lot of people because it's data privacy and the big challenge that I think North Americans don't necessarily appreciate this sometimes is that when we talk about AI, what does AI stand for? Everyone thinks artificial intelligence. Well, is it actually American intelligence? Because a lot of the models are created out in America. A lot of them are hosted there. That creates, so I think in North America has a bit more. Well, certainly USA has a bit more freedom in terms of the regulation because it's a bit more. I'd say Wild West out there in terms of regulation, and there's not much structure at the moment, is it? That might change dramatically. Things are happening quite dramatically out there, aren't they? In Europe, they obviously set up the EU AI Act, which there's been almost like a kind of a drawback on it. They've kind of rescinded some of the ideas and almost disseminated it out to the countries to make their own decisions, which again causes more problems and complexities. And in America, statewide, you've got organisations that are, the actual states are setting up their own regulation. So it's a kind of murky, foggy space for us here in the UK. And I kind of like, in a way, I hope Ofqual doesn't set too many kind of limits on it. It's sometimes a little bit hard because they kind of often say, well, do what you want to do, but just be prepared to justify yourself. It's always been almost like Ofqual's mantra here in the UK or in England, which makes it hard to step forward. I would like to see more kind of support in terms of understanding where you can, what technology you can use, where you can use it, data privacy, because AI comes with risks. It's not a risk-free thing. So I think, things are going to continue to evolve, and like Matt says, people are going to start using AI in localized areas, for localized opportunities where they can. I do hope we, as a community, we kind of draw together a bit more kind of practical guidance as what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, certainly in terms of data storage. And we almost feed that back to the industries that are supporting it, so that we've got more data sovereignty in the UK or wherever, that we can manage and develop things with confidence. I think that's the bit at the moment we're lacking at the moment, is the lack of confidence about the development of AI in assessment.
Can I come in just with another thought there? Because I think it's interesting, just while Tim was talking, the point about the UK being an interestingly complicated regulatory landscape is true, because you do have these 4 different regulators working across the UK, and everyone looks to Ofqual as the gold standard, unfortunately. And that I say unfortunately,
well, I don't mean in a
disparaging way, but when they're saying to be cautious about AI, that tends to filter across the whole of the UK, not just.
They have a big voice.
They do, not just within England. But we also have to remember that the UK has a particularly complicated assessment technology landscape as well, in the sense that England is to some degree behind the curve when you come to school-based assessments and using technology generally. Ofqual is still debating the use of on-screen assessment in schools. I mean, this is 3 years into that conversation. Things take a long time. Whereas Wales, through Qualification Wales, they're launching their own digital GCSE 16 plus exams, going online, and they've redesigned them to be more digitally native. So you can live on the Welsh side of the border and get digital exams, and you can live just a few miles away on the English side of the border, and it's all still pen and paper. So there's quite a complicated landscape. So when you start to look at introducing AI and other technologies on top of that, people's minds do explode a little bit, because they're still trying to get to grips with that. And then you have the difference of some professional bodies have been using, I'm working with one at the moment, that's been using digital on-screen assessment for 20 years. And that's both here in the UK and internationally. So, it's a really diverse market, and that means it's also a very challenging market to introduce change to. But pockets of exploration, are the germs that things build from, the seeds that things build from.
Some of the challenges that we face at the moment is that we're not fundamentally rethinking how we assess. I think when the challenges around digital assessment, well, how do we fit 30,000 students into an exam hall for that's
the problem.
I know. Yeah, you need to kind of and we've seen this with Qualification Wales and the diagnostic stuff. And here in England. The GCSEs are actually redundant really now, aren't they? Really, because you stay in education until you're 18. Better to give them a diagnostic that they can figure out their future. And I think this is where we're kind of within the assessment community. We're trying to solve a problem that doesn't really need solving, because the actual kind of the whole question of assessment is not being tackled on a kind of national, regional, government level. And unfortunately, until we really start to rethink that. And I think AI is going to massively, as I said earlier, it's going to change how we work and live. We need to wake up to that now.
We do, because we are trying to retrofit technology to 19th century assessment approaches in many respects. And actually, the assessments need to keep track with where the employers want the candidates to be, and so to your point, we need to reinvent the assessments in many respects to make so that the technology is there supporting them naturally. Because that's what they're going to need to be using. So it's a bit like, and I roll this story out every now and again because I think it's quite humorous, that a few years ago the chief executive of Cambridge Assessment got sacked because he suggested that candidates should have Google in the exam hall. Well, why not? Because
that's a tool.
It's a tool, and they're going to be using it all the time, and so why not be able to use it within the exam? And it's exactly the same argument that we're having around generative AI and access to that.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think that, again, this whole concept of rethinking, like we're so used to those point-in-time assessment, large-scale assessment that are designed with a specific purpose, obviously. And then this whole concept of validity, reliability, they're really, really important from a measurement standpoint. But then it's kind of like shifting and saying, wow, we have access to different types of tools and technology that will allow us to, instead of having points in time assessment, like more continuous points that where you can assess and provide feedback. But this whole concept from a pure assessment measurement perspective is kind of like, oh, no. You're assessing to determine if you meet a certain standard versus, there's in the world of like this, especially from a credentialing standpoint, or determining have you met a specific criteria. So I think that there's an opportunity to merge even more so the concept of learning and education and assessment, where you have that interaction and technology supports that interaction and feedback. And now a short break. Hello, tried and tested listeners and fellow testing enthusiasts. I'm Isabelle Gonthier, your guide through the fascinating world of credentialing. Each week, we dive deep with expert guests to explore the hottest topics in certification and licensure testing. If you're enjoying our journey through lifelong learning and innovation, take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you know someone passionate about testing or curious about the latest testing trends, why not share this podcast with them? It might just be the inspiration they need. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our community. Remember, sharing knowledge is one of the best ways to grow our industry together. Keep listening. I want to get us to talk a little bit about some of the elements around, as we think about technology, as we think about how we're evolving, but possibly changing assessment, and looking at the continued importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So as we think about it in the UK assessment landscape context, as we think about how we can choose to think in adapting those assessments, I think there's an interesting angle there that we can build on. How do we play that? Because I know it's a little challenging, and we're seeing that, we're seeing that around the world right now, that there's different levels of and lenses being applied. But at the same time, as we think about how we can use technology while maintaining that lens of making sure we're not creating additional barriers. We want to remove those barriers, minimize the barriers. So, Matt, interested in your perspective there.
Yeah, it's not an easy,
I know.
an easy one to come up with an answer for. But I think so. A little story that perhaps illustrates the opportunity that exists, because I'm a firm believer that the technology can be a leveler in terms of access to exams. It is now several years ago, and again, this shows the fragmented approach that we have in the UK. In going back to Wales again, they rolled out a national formative test to all primary and secondary school-age children. And interestingly, from the get-go, it was seen as formative. It wasn't seen as a summative measure, which I think is really interesting. Completely the opposite to what the English national tests are about, and they've become more of a stick to beat up the schools rather than an opportunity to measure how the student's doing and to see how to positively impact that. So anyway, they rolled out these completely digital formative tests in the schools. And there was a lot of concern about how that would affect accessibility for students who had particular needs. And in fact, it's become a real positive. And listening to some of the stories of students talking about their experience of the tests, particularly the ones who, so they still offer Braille, for students who are blind, but some students would receive very large print, and they'd be given, in the old-fashioned way of doing it, a big piece of paper with the questions on so that they could read them, or they'd have a coloured background, piece of paper, to help them understand what the words were saying. Now on the screen, that's all done for them, and the view of the students, which I thought was really interesting, is that this has made it much less obvious that they have particular needs while still serving those needs. So it's not calling them out as being different in the same way as, here, Johnny, have this huge piece of paper because you're different from everybody else. Now,
and everybody sees that.
But now they just alter the settings on the screen and they're off. And so they don't feel as if they're being treated differently. But of course they are. They're being treated according to their needs. And I think that's a huge opportunity for technology to do that. Now, there are always going to be exceptions to that, and there are always going to be some areas where we're not as good at supporting those needs, and I think we have to be very open and honest about those things. And that particularly applies perhaps to gender and the way that we approach that in our assessments. Whether technology can help with that or not is another question. But I think on the whole, technology should be a leveler rather than something that disadvantages.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It kind of provides opportunity. It helps with the adapting in a more seamless manner, as you just mentioned. Yeah. Tim, when you think about that, building on this, as we think of the technology with the goal of maintaining fairness and inclusivity, how do you see the role, especially of generative AI, but just in general as well for technology?
I think a few things we need to be cautious of is that, the large language models and those kind of things at the moment are being developed and trained on probably largely kind of English-based text and information. So, we need to have that in the back of our minds when we're using them as part of the process. But that said, that's going to evolve. We're going to be training new models that over time that are going to be, I would hope, more inclusive of the kind of global picture and different communities and different representations. And there's huge opportunities at the moment, just even for now, to use AI to check your items, to check your questions, for setting contexts for various different communities. So let's run through the item bank with, let's bear in mind that we're delivering this test in India. Let's use some of the things that matter to them and are important to them, and look at the question bank and flag some of the items that might not be fair as a result of the kind of constraints or thinking or processes, the cultural aspects in there. So I think there's great opportunities there and then. Large language models are largely, although some of them multimodal in terms of their development with images and text, etc. What we still don't really fully understand, or there isn't a large language model out there that understands the physical world, and that's going to be the next. I'm going to put my blue sky big thinking hat on. That is going to be the next kind of leap in terms of AI, and how it understands the whole world, and that opens up so much more potential for moving away from tests, which are obviously text on screen and questions and those kind of things, to being, literally do whatever you need to do, and
experiencing.
If you need to do your accountancy qualification through interpretive dance, then fine. It could be assessed in that way. Be interesting one, that one too. But it's going to go truly multimodal, and I think then to that kind of point, Matt's story about the kind of moving from paper. I think we will have a space where people will be able to use whatever technology interface in order to do that. So my dream is that it will really start to level out that kind of world, because I think there was that cartoon sketch of you're going to be assessed now, and it's got there's a range of elephants and monkeys and lions, climb that tree, and it's not possible for all those animals to do it in the same kind of way. I want us to just have that flexible opportunity to be able to be assessed in a more flexible way that represents you and the way you work, presentation, podcast. And we are seeing bits more and more of that content, especially as that the question of authenticity is kind of coming up with a lot of, the higher education space particularly, has been, it just doesn't know where to go really. They've lived off essays as a form of assessment.
Very traditional approach.
They just, and I get the impression there's a lot of teachers in that profession are just kind of counted down the days to retirement, or rather tried to solve this problem, because it's higher education needs to fundamentally change. But massive opportunity, and I think going back to that thing, 5-10 years, I just think the world's going to look so different.
It's interesting. So one of the points at the workforce mobility roundtable that I was at today, looking sort of on the international stage, is that they came up with this sort of title for this change, which is proxy to proof. So there's a shift, particularly in international markets now, away from traditional vocational qualifications, absolutely away from degrees, as an ability to indicate that you can do a job, and that it's more about being able to prove that you have the competencies and the skills to do those things. And so actually one of the biggest challenges, I think, now is, and technology can definitely help with this, is making those competencies and skills measurements portable, and evolvable, if that's even a word, so that you can change, they can change with you as you go through your career, or, if you want to take a job in Australia, that's possible based on the qualification that you've got. And, particularly around degrees, that's just not the case anymore.
It's not structured that way.
They are seen more as a social thing. And the speakers this morning were saying that you need a degree in order to get married in Southeast Asia, in many of the countries now, because it's seen as a social status, not as an employability thing. So we need to evolve the assessment to make it more focused around the skills and the competencies.
Yeah, and meet the demand of the workforce and that evolution. I think that's an important point, and that portability, the whole concept of durable skills and competencies, that's kind of what is becoming more critical to evolve in an ever-changing world. So at this point in time, it's like we can talk about all of this forever. But as we sort of wrap up our conversation, I love the conversation we've been having around the future of assessment and all of those elements. But maybe parting words, if I can put it that way, what would be your recommendation to awarding organizations that are navigating, like working towards a lot of changes while trying to maintain like the credibility of what they do, the consistency of what they do, but not getting stuck in certain ways based on the conversation we just had. Matt, what are your recommendations to the?
Well, I think many of them are already doing this. I think there's an increasing move away from big monolithical qualifications to more micro-credential approaches. And I think that's increasingly important because that means that you can be more agile with those as demand and as the markets move forward and as the demand from employers and others change, you can adapt to those things. And you can also make them more portable because they're smaller, they're easier to digest, and they can be used as building blocks to develop a personalized approach to assessment. And we use that personalization word a lot in education around learning, and I think increasingly we should be thinking about it from an assessment point of view, so that there is a set of micro-credentials that you build to serve the needs of you as an individual learner that allow you to develop and move forward. And I think a lot of the awarding bodies are gradually moving to those models. I think we're seeing it more in the professional body space, where they're they're working with people who are already in the workplace or are on the cusp of moving into it. I think we also need to see it in the lower levels of education, so in the schools and in the colleges. Because it's all going back to that authenticity piece that Tim was just mentioning. It's about preparing the student for what they're going to need moving forward. And that doesn't mean that you're teaching a 16-year-old to be a scientist or whatever, but you need to give them the fundamental building blocks that they can then adapt and develop. So my view of the future of assessment and making predictions is terribly fraught with problems. Is that we become more modular in the way that we deliver our assessments. And there's part of me that I mentioned this morning about history repeating itself, because you can think about something like the qualifications framework that we used to have in the UK, and see the merits of that in a model that that we're now trying to evolve and aspire to in terms of building a modular micro-credential piece, because everything within that needs currency. It needs to be worth something, whether in combination with another block or on its own. And we need some sort of guidance and framework to support that. But yes, I think that's about moving away from these big monolithical qualifications into more micro.
Yeah, the modular approach kind of allows for that flexibility as well in terms of and the portability that we've just talked about. It does. For sure. Yeah. Tim, any perspective from your?
So I think obviously some of the listeners will be domain experts within their kind of subjects and fields, and I think what they need to look at is how their industry is going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years, and basically you need to act accordingly. You need to get prepared for a very much a flipped landscape, and I think that might mean just flipping the way you assess and the whole approach. AI is going to be a significant part of the kind of day to day, so you can't ignore that. I'm not necessarily saying you need to give everyone access to OpenAI or ChatGPT during the exam, but there needs to be some kind of flip in that process. I think there's certain question types out there, MCQ and stuff like that, which I think people need to think about a bit more detail as to, because if AI gets into a test and an MCQ questions on the screen, then there's a strong chance that they're going to be able to cheat that qualification. So there's going to be a lot more kind of performance-based activity going on. So I think just people really need to kind of rethink that process and just start to act now. That I think there's some great initiatives going on. I think there's one example I want to mention. Simulated internships, in the way that the idea that you could simulate the way you do a job and a role, and you were saying about proof, those kind of things, those kind of initiatives should be embraced more and being a bit more flexible. There are some challenges, I think, though, for funded qualifications. The fact that there's so much legislation and bureaucracy involved in bringing up a qualification, and the risk there is obviously that that's going to mean that these flexible qualifications are only be available to the people that can afford them, or the organisations that get benefit from that. But I think, yes, we need to get a lot more adaptive. We need to get a lot more go that kind of micro route. I think that career, half-life at the moment is 4 years or something like that. In terms of the skills process, that's going to get halved even more, I think. So we need to think about, look at your subject, look at how things are going to look in 5 to 10 years, and really start to address that now. Finally, I just want to say that there's a big tendency at the moment to obviously use AI to help generate items, and that's changing the role of the subject matter expert in the process. We need those subject matter experts. We need those experts in the loop, and we need to think about their future role in that process, where that sits, whether it's at the start of it, the journey, or at some point. That we can't lose that expert mentality.
I think that's a very critical point, is that it continued to evolve, but figure out a way to, at one point in time, that engagement is critical, but the engagement continues to be critical and paramount. So
I think keeping the human in the loop.
Yes.
The experts in the loop. That's my
experts. Yeah, because then you can define experts in so many different ways. But yeah, absolutely. Well, let's keep the conversation going. I think that's kind of what makes these events so interesting and rewarding in so many ways. Podcasts like this kind of like allows for the conversations to happen, and it doesn't stop there. So I really appreciate your time today. So let's keep the conversation going, as I said, and thank you for participating.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Isabelle.